Good morning, afternoon, evening, ladies and gentlemen. Whatever time you're tuning in the program called What's Going On allpointstv.com. I'm George Moss again. I feel I have to reintroduce myself after being away for 3 weeks. I was out of the country and have just returned. I got back in last night, which would have been on the 16th at around 11:30. And this was a very eventful trip. One of the most eventful trips that I've had out of the country. Starting actually at the airport at the beginning of my trip, which was here in Flint, where I missed my connection because the first plane was late by an hour, and if you're traveling both domestically and internationally, if you miss a flight, then you're going to be set back at least for a day in making the travel outside the country, because they have these flight schedules so that they give you a lot of wiggle room between one flight and another, because you never can tell when you're going to have a backup and you need to make the connecting flight in another country. And so when I got to my next destination, which would have been where the flight would have started in Flint, and then I was going to arrive in Chicago. And then out of Chicago, you take the first two flights would be the United Airlines, and then when you get to Europe, you take Brussels, and then there's another flight from Brussels into Amsterdam, where I would be for the duration of the rest of the trip. But I didn't get to the real destination till like 2 or 3 days after I had started on the journey, because the connections are not every hour. It's like when I missed the connection in Chicago, I couldn't get out until the next day, and that was the lady told me that you're gonna be stuck somewhere. So you either are gonna be stuck in Chicago and you can stay here overnight, or you can go to Europe where it's more expensive. You're gonna be stuck somewhere in one of the airports there. And so what I decided to do was to keep going a leg up on the journey, so that I can get at least the next part of the travelogue in place. So every time I had a chance to just go further down the road to the travel destination, I did so. But I have to say that I was given a chance to stay in a hotel at the expense of United Airlines. They didn't want to do it, but it was their fault that I was backed up and couldn't get out of the country because of the fact they were late at the very beginning of the journey. So I stayed overnight in Chicago, and it just was one thing after another. I left my I left my keys at the hotel, and when I realized I didn't have my keys, but I had the rest of everything I needed, so I called back and told them that I would have them send the keys to my home. And they, when I came back to the country, got back in the States on Sunday, I called the hotel, and they charged to my Discover card and told me they're going to send the keys back to Flint. So that was just one part of the event. It was a venture. It was a venture from one thing to another. And making the connections, you'd be surprised at how much of a problem you have making connections in international flight. Once you miss one part of it, everything is off kilter at that point. You got to now begin to remake the connections from one place to another. And I think it was in the Brussels airport for at least 24 hours. And then when the plane finally arrived, then you look out the window, and now they're working on the plane for 5 hours, because when the plane arrived, they got some engine problems. So it's 24 hours, another 5 hours in the airport. And I have to say that they give us, at that juncture, they gave us a $27 food allowance. I guess that was food stamps for the travelers. And so we ended up at the airport an additional 5 hours. But on the plus side, it's not all negative. Although I don't think I'll be traveling through those two airlines next time. I won't be going United Airlines and then Brussels, which was a marriage made in hell. I think I'll be going a different route next time. I think I'll be going more directly. Maybe going through Atlanta, because I've had some bad luck going through Chicago. And so in the future, I've got to rethink my strategy, and maybe I won't go the cheapest route next time like I did this time. I went through Chicago because it gave me the best price. But I've had some problems in the past going through Chicago, so I think I'm going to have to pay a higher price and go through Atlanta and then exile the country. But either way it goes, is you're going to have some problems because you're going to have some layover. But it was eventful from the standpoint that when I'm staying in these airports for a duration of time, you meet some very interesting people. And I met in Brussels. Brussels is Belgium is south of Amsterdam. So I met some very eventful people in the Brussels airport, and being there for an extended period of time, you find out a lot of things about other people that are traveling and some of the things they've gone through. And what I didn't know really at Brussels is that underneath the airport, down below on the ground level, there's a train station. I didn't know that. And you can travel by rail, which the railroad connects Europe up one part of it to another, and you could even go on the ground of the English Channel and go on the ground. If you get to France, you can go on the ground on the rail line into England. So I'll be thinking about that as I travel more so next year, because I'll be doing Europe now on a continuous basis, having pretty much explored all of West Africa. So I'm kind of now looking at some of the museum possibilities in Europe.
Now, how come you decided to go to Europe? I mean, you said you explored it, but there's a lot. I mean, there's 54 nations in Africa.
Yeah, there are 54 nations in Africa, but I think I've seen what I needed to see. I want to get a grounding point of some of the dissimilarities and similarities in Africa. And I had been to Egypt, so I had an idea of the Middle East through the Egyptian experience in 1984. And then I had gone back to Africa in 2006, where I was in Ghana and Nigeria. And starting in 2007, went to South Africa, and then came up from South Africa and went to Gambia, where I wanted to see the Alex Haley roots, the things he claimed in the book called Roots, that he claimed that his ancestor Kunti Kinte from the Jufure tribe in Gambia was where his ancestors were from. I wanted to go and check that story out, and found that to be a bogus claim. So I got interested in going to West Africa based upon having traveled up from South Africa into the northern part of Africa, going into Gambia, and going back to Nigeria on that trip as well. So I just got interested in going from one part of Africa to another. But having been in 17 countries in Africa, I think I've seen it all. And the question right now is what do you now do in some of your other experiences, trying to learn as much as you can? And I'm looking at some of the museums now. So I went to the museum in Amsterdam. They got two major museums. One that pretty much situates itself around the work of Rembrandt, and then one of the other major museums in Amsterdam was one that was featuring the art of Vincent van Gogh, and they're very proud of their 16th and 17th century artists. Take a lot of pride in that. So it was really quite an experience to go in there and see it from another standpoint. One thing I think we can learn from Amsterdam was the co-equivalent position of the bicycles. I mean, if we're serious about what we say about conservation, and I don't think we're serious. I think a lot of that is politics. But if we're serious about it, then we can take a page out of what I saw in Amsterdam, where there was the equivalency between the persons driving automobiles as one mode of transportation, and those who are using bicycles. Bicycles are a major mode of transportation in Holland, in the Netherlands, and they even have a lane set aside where the cars cannot be in this lane. It's all for bicycles that have a co-equal place on the street with the cars. And in this one lane, you only have bicycles allowed, so they're co-equal partners on the street with the cars. And if you're really serious about conservation, and you're saying that you're worried about pollution and you worry about energy conservation, all things we talk about, global warming even, and all these political issues that I don't think we're serious about. We certainly raise it as if it is a serious issue, if we're serious about it, more than just using it as a political issue. Then I think you have to take a page of what they're doing there, and look at. Plus the cardiovascular aspect of it, you got all this healthcare issues now, where you're trying to lower the cost of healthcare. So you got to create the instruments to which you have more cardiovascular means of getting your health issues on the table, and more bicycles in the population would be one way to do it. We drive, I know we get our car. You get in the car here and you drive next door.
See, I've often thought that myself, and see that anchors actually a lot of conservatives. Though, if you actually point to Europe having any kind of good ideas, a lot of conservatives just become like incised by it. I mean, it's like, I've heard about because I have cousins who visit. I have cousins that live in Hungary, but all of Europe was much more accepting of bicycles. For some reason, here it's not considered a serious mode of transportation. You're almost ridiculed if you believe it is.
Yeah.
And I've always thought it was. And they have a program in Michigan. Actually, they're taking some of the railroad grades. The ones that they no longer use in section of the railroad. The grades, that they had, and it's called the trails or something like that. And they put in bicycle paths through those. And a lot of conservatives I've talked to are just like, that's ridiculous. We should just concentrate on roads. I'm not going to have my money. Like, all right, so all this stuff can be raised, private funds, and and it doesn't have to be as heavy construction for bicycle paths as it would for motor vehicle traffic. Simple fact, you don't have the weight, and it just like you're hitting a stone wall. I mean, it's almost like you're saying. It's basically, I think that some conservatives almost see it as almost emasculation, and it's like, I think it's a good way. We got couch potatoes who can't even go up a flight of steps without getting winded.
Yeah, you're right, John. I don't think we're serious about it. I think a lot of it is just politics. But if we are serious, then that is one thing we can borrow from Holland that they're doing. They're doing it well. I saw so many bicycles. I was wondering if there were any bicycles left in any other parts of the world, because you saw so many of them out there. And it's not a hobby with them. They are using it as a major instrument of transportation. And it's not because of the lack of petroleum, because one of the things that they do in Holland is that they have a lot, in fact, Holland does a lot of refining. And up until the time that Asia took over, Amsterdam, really Rotterdam, was the major port city in Europe. I mean, more things came out of the harbor, the Rotterdam harbor, than anywhere else in Europe, and in fact anywhere else in the world. It's a major port city. It's now been supplanted by some of the things happening in Asia, but at that time it was Rotterdam. And it's just really interesting to go there and see some of the grandeur that Holland. We forget some of the grandeur that Holland, the Dutch, stood for back in the day. In fact, they were the forgotten partners in many parts of the world. It was the Dutch that was out there. In fact, the largest company that has ever existed, which is what I found out when I was there, the largest company that's ever existed was the Dutch Royal Indian Company. That's the largest company ever created in the history of the world. That was a very large company, and we have had nothing that supplanted it since that time period, going back to when the Dutch supplanted the Portuguese at such places that even in Africa, where you had them transplanting the Portuguese at the first slave fort in Africa, which was the Elmina Fort that was built in let me get this date straight, that was built in 1482, or was it 1582? It's one of those two. And in the building of that fort, the Castle of Elmina, which I was in in 2007. And the Dutch took that over in 1637. So I think it was built in 1582, and then the Dutch came in and supplanted the Portuguese in 1637 and took it over at that point because it had the might in order to do so. And that tells you something about Holland back in that day. What I didn't know, and I'm in a seminar, so I'm finding out a lot of things I didn't know, and I didn't know that Holland was the first one to ordain same-sex marriage in Europe. I think they might have been the first one in the world to have endorse officially same-sex marriage. And so we are just a Johnny-come-lately in that regard here in the United States. And I think another thing, having been there and just kind of looking over the landscape, having a lot of conversation with a lot of different people, very interesting people. I mean, I met one person from in one of the was a med student, 19-year-old med student, who spoke 7 different languages. At least that was a claim that was made. I had no reason to doubt it. Now, you know, we're Americans, so we are monolingual. We might speak one language, though, in 7 different ways based upon the slang and the audience is speaking to. But this person claimed, I had no reason to doubt it, was speaking 7 different languages and was very smart. It was both this student and the mom, who were Macedonians. And I mean, brilliant people. And we had a very interesting dialogue. The mom was trying to tell me about her memory of Marshal Tito. And I guess she thought I didn't know anything about I'm a history major, so I think she thought she's gonna pull the wool over my eye and telling me about the grandeur of Marshal Tito, who was the one that held the varying groups in Yugoslavia together from the end of World War II in 1945 until the death of Tito in 1980. And she was telling me about how great he was as a communist leader and how he was standing up to the Russians under Joseph Stalin from the time that Stalin was in power to the time that Stalin died in 1953. And then after 53, Nikita Khrushchev, another communist thug, took over from 53 to 71 when at the time of his death. And so she was telling about the grandeur and the greatness of Marshal Tito and how he had done a great job in holding the jigsaw puzzle together of Yugoslavia. And then after his death, and then the breakup of the Soviet Union in 1991, where you had all these varying groups that were kept together under this communist frame and began to break apart, so that you had the Serbians and Kosovo, and you had Croatia and the Macedonians and other groups, Montenegro and other groups that began to break out of it. Each group wanted its own autonomy. And out of it came Macedonia, which was where these persons were coming from when I was talking to them at the airport. And they were very interesting people. I think I wore the ear out of the mom, though, because I wasn't buying that Marshal Tito was anything to write home about, because I consider all communists to be thugs. But I didn't want her to think that I was picking on her country, Yugoslavia, now with all the different groups coming out of it and now being different, smaller groups. Because I told her about the thug we have here running for president. And he's a thug, but he's a hidden thug, talking about his running for president under the banner of democratic socialism. And we're talking about mixed marriages and same-sex marriage and political marriages. That's a marriage that's untenable. There's no such thing as a democratic socialist. It used to be, they were telling us back in the 60s that socialism was scientific. And I remember these guys were saying, scientific socialism, as if you can make anything in the political arena scientific, so it works as if it's working from a scientific formula. I used to hear in the 60s, scientific socialism. Now it's democratic socialism. And that's what is being pushed by Bernard Sanders, Bernie Sanders. So I didn't want her to think I was picking on on Marshal Tito, I call Marshal Tito a thug. I give him credit for being a nationalist in terms of standing up to the thuggery of Joseph Stalin, but standing up to him for what reason? So that he could become the thug inside of the land space where he was. But this idea that you're going to set up a democratic model of communism or a democratic model of socialism is nonsense. And so to make sure that they didn't think I was coming out of any arrogant bag, and they look for you to be arrogant. When you come from America, they're just waiting to see if you're trying to stand above the fray and you're going to come with this position. They think you're an arrogant American, and you're going to come with this position that we are great and everybody else is less great, which I don't think they buy in Europe that anymore, quite frankly, though, in terms of what I found in Europe this time on this journey was this idea that America is a country in decline. And I found that everywhere I went. In every country I was in 3 different countries. In every country I was in, I found this notion that America is a country in decline, and it doesn't have the same perch on the outside that it once had. And it seems to me that there's a general consensus in place of dismissing America. And I saw it even in watching television, where the major network in Europe is the BBC. They seem to be the ones that give Europe its news. I mean, they're probably the best news source in Europe, from what I could tell. Now I'm talking about 2 weeks there, so the best I could tell is that the BBC does most of the news that is looked at throughout Europe. Although there were some other stations, I saw Press TV, which I thought was very biased. And it seems like Press TV is a news source that comes straight out of the Middle East. And it is a very biased network, more so than Al Jazeera, which is like CNN in a lot of ways. It's very left-leaning, and in some ways, it is the CNN of the international community. But CNN is also a factor in the outside of the United States.
You know, that kind of bothers me too. They always go on about Fox News, which I don't watch. I get my news from looking at different things on the internet, and when somebody mentions something on Facebook or whatever, I go to a different source, I type it in, I read all the way down to maybe 3 or 4 different, so you get a fairly decent mix. You know, you get maybe stuff from C-SPAN or not C-SPAN, ESPN or CNN or even Fox or whatever. So I don't watch one news source. Basically, I know my political philosophy anyway. So anything that's like, I can see through it. I know I can read what these statements, open it up, and say this is a load of crap. But yeah, it just seems like everybody rails against us having Fox News. You get your news from Fox News. So it's like all the other ones are saying the same thing you are. So why do you have a problem with an alternate news source that might be saying something that is very biased? Admittedly, even admitting the potential for bias, why is it so horrific for them to have somebody out there with a different viewpoint?
Yeah.
Why is that so terrifying or so anger arousing in these people? I don't understand.
You know, John, you can tell that Europe is quite to the left by the fact that you can't find Fox in Europe. I mean, I saw what had Fox movie network, where you had movies all day on one station that is Fox Movies is what it's called. But in terms of the Fox News, I didn't see that in a place where I was, and I kept churning the stations. It's not like you can get 100 stations over there. Now you can forget that. But I didn't see Fox News, although I know they're in certain international waters. But where I was, I didn't see Fox. I saw CNN here where I was, and I saw the BBC wherever I was. And you know, it's really interesting to look at their coverage. That's another thing I wanted to talk about when I came to the studio today, and that was talk about the coverage of the news stories here in the United States. For example, I was not able to see the debate that went on. I think it was on the 8th of this month when they had the first of the Republican debates, with the next one set up. When is that going to be? But in that first debate, I didn't see it because it was on Fox. I did see the coverage later on Anderson Cooper's program, that he had a format after the debate was over, and then you saw it pretty much the dialogue on it on CNN. But I didn't see the debate itself because Fox was not. I couldn't find Fox over there. But it was really interesting to hear some of the comments that were made, and what I was able to glean from the conversation. First of all, you look at it over there, but you're looking at it through what they're reporting and also through the lens they're showing it through. But you also have the American lens that you are watching it as well, knowing the internal politics of this country, where the Republican Party supposedly hates women and it hates blacks. And so it's really interesting to see where Megyn Kelly, who asked the first question, I'm assuming this to be true because they had bits and pieces of the debate cut up, so I'm just assuming that the first question that was asked by Megyn Kelly, and she asked who on the stage would declare that if you're not the nominee for the Republican Party, that you would not run as a third party candidate. Now, folks, who do you think that question was aimed at? They had 10 people on the stage at that time, because that's the second of the debate. They had the other was it 6 members earlier? Didn't see that either, but I do know they were challenged to not exclude anybody from being on television and give them a chance to air their views. So what they did in order to get around any FCC requirements of having equal time for all the political candidates, what they did was give the other 6 candidates, or now it looks like 7 candidates, a chance to air their views in a debate that preceded the major candidates, the 10 who have the standing in terms of poll numbers. And it was just interesting to see how the first question out of the box was which of the candidates would pledge not to run as a third party if they were not the nominee for the Republican Party. And of course, as I said, who was that question aimed at? As if there was anyone else that's going to run on the outside if they don't get the nomination except Donald Trump. And when they asked the question, Trump, true to form, and this is one of the things that's attractive about him, he raised his hand. He's a candidate that would not pledge not to run as a third-party candidate if he's not the nominee. And I think it's particularly true if they continue this kind of ganging up, as I see them doing, and I can see it over there, to gang up on Trump to stop Donald Trump. And what they're betting on is that as more persons drop out of the race, what they're hoping is that as persons drop out, then the numbers of those candidates will then begin to go into areas where other non-Trump candidates are running for the office, and therefore it will embolden their numbers over the long run. So as they eliminate more and more candidates whose candidacy would not be viable because they don't have the numbers, 2%, 3%, and things of that sort, then you'll begin to have those numbers added to the other candidates, probably Jeb Bush and some of the others. Maybe, I don't think this is more likely to be the case, but maybe Rick Perry and, knock on wood, hopefully not Rand Paul, and there are a couple of others you can name. I mean, I saw Rick Perry telling the viewers how he stood there and I told the president that if he would not seal the borders, then I would take it upon myself to do so. And he stands forthrightly and turns to the camera in a very dramatic moment and let people know that he then would do it himself, and so on and so forth, as if they're not 5 cities in Texas that he knew about that were sanctuary cities, just like they have almost all of California is like that. And they have 5 of those cities in Texas under the administration of Rick Perry when he's governor of that state. So anyway, there are these other parties that are hoping to, as they bow out, to get those numbers added to their numbers, and then you can hold Trump's numbers around 25%. Don't let the numbers grow. They can eventually transcend his numbers and take over the leadership of the Republican Party, which they're counting on. But I have to tell you something, that when he said, and I'm looking at it from an outsider standpoint, but I'm also an insider, and since I saw it also before I left the country, but look at it through the lens of how it was reported over there abroad. that I think that it's disingenuous for only one person to raise their hand as a potential third-party candidate. For the standpoint is that if you think the other candidates are fine, then why did you throw your head in the ring? You know, I'm not bad this, nor is that it's unforeseeable and unforgivable for a person to announce that if it's not the nominee, without knowing who the nominee would be, under all circumstances, the rest of the candidates, if they become the nominee, that's fine. Well, then what are you running against them for? If that is true, if the candidates are acceptable as a party or label, then I don't know what the candidacy would be about if you find that there's no problem with them being the candidate of the party. So I think it's a certain amount of dishonesty in that respect. And then, of course, I know the argument becomes, well, what about delivering the election to Hillary Clinton or whoever's running in the Democratic Party, including this avowed socialist, Democratic socialist over the Democratic Party, Bernie, like he's a personal friend, Bernard Sanders. You know how these politicians like for us to call them Bill and Bob, and you know, Bernie rather than Bernard, or Jimmy rather than James, as if they're more familiar to us by familiarizing us with their name, FDR, rather than Franklin Delano Roosevelt, FDR.
Yeah, Jimmy Carter, though, I think he encouraged Jimmy instead of James because he wanted to come across as the everyman. And
yeah.
my mom did research back then, and everybody's saying, he's just like one of us. My mom goes, he's worth $6 million.
Yeah.
6 or 8 million. And back in the 70s terms of money, that was a lot of money.
Yeah.
And because it's like since the 80s, our inflationary rate's gone up 100%. You know, a lot of it on what they call the basket of items. So if you figure that in, you know, he was worth about maybe $20-30 million now, which is quite a bit for, you know, so he was not your average person anyway.
Well, John, so, I look forward to I would like to see the race between Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump. I think that would be a good way of having a choice for a change. I mean, with Bernie Sanders, we have an avowed socialist. And with Donald Trump, we have a unapologetic capitalist. I mean, Donald Trump is bragging every time he opens his mouth about how much money he's made.
See, I think that socialism, though, has got more of appeal now than it did before. So, yeah, it's good. You got these clear-cut choices, but you got so many people, the younger people, are uneducated about what socialism really entails, what happens with it. And it sounds attractive. I mean, superficially, that's where it attracts a lot of people. Superficially, it sounds fair.
Yeah.
It sounds, but you don't realize that basically, you got to have a system which creates so much excess, like capitalism, that you can be more generous with capitalism. Socialism, everything's so minutely controlled. You're not going to have any slop. You're not going to have benevolence. You're not. Basically, everything's earmarked. It's a command economy. We need this, even though you don't really need them. They want this many units of this. And it sounds really, to the untrained or the people who just never have an experience, it sounds really good, but it's never worked. And they always constantly say, all these die-hard apologists for it will keep on saying, it's never been implemented in the right area. It's like, where the hell is that at?
Yeah.
Where is that ever at? I mean, and the same people who are saying this are people who go around and go travel throughout Europe, and they have homes in different places, and they're talking to me about socialism. I remember this when I was in college over at Mott and at U of M. All these die-hard apologists for socialism and communism were people who worried about money, had investments and everything. They're such big, glaring hypocrites. I laughed at them. Here I was from working class. They were denouncing the system. They're enjoying more benefit than I was, and I was defending the system, and that they didn't feel at least bit chagrined about being in the wealthy class and didn't give up any of that wealth, not voluntarily anyway.
John, if you want to see socialism, go to Europe. You can go anywhere in Europe and see it. And the collapse is inevitable. But one of the things I did when I was over there, I read 3 books while I was there, so that was on the plus side. I like to always get something done in terms of reading, and I knew I was not going to be on Facebook while I was there because it takes time to do that, and then you're on a network that other people are using. And I knew I was not going to be on Facebook while I was there, and so I wasn't publishing articles on Facebook during my trip. But I used that time to read, and one of the books I read was this book by Schumpeter, who was an economist, an Austrian economist. I think that he died in the 1950s. But before having done, they wrote a book called, I think his best known work was Capitalism, Socialism, and Democracy, which the updated version in 1972 was called Can Capitalism Survive? And Schumpeter takes a very interesting read on that. And one of the points that he makes is that first of all, his answer is no. Although he was a capitalist himself, but his answer was that capitalism would not survive, which is quite an interesting conclusion. But the reason that he took that position was because Schumpeter took the position that capitalism has built in it, being an innovative economic system, that eventually it runs out of things to innovate, and because of that, and the market being what it is, and it gets to a place where there's no real market opportunity, as he says, then it lends itself to a socialist, landscape. For this reason, for the reason that those who are dependent upon that the capitalist system depends upon for its protection, by the very success of capitalism, what Schumpeter claims is that by its success, it makes the protectors obsolete. Because if it is able to generate wealth and producing, then what is the need for the political class to be overseeing operations? Because it makes them obsolete and puts them on the sideline. So those who are supposed to be its protectors, because the state staying on the sideline, allowing it to go in the direction it goes into, and making sure the laws are not being violated, but it doesn't really regulate it. The market determines its input and output. Then its success kind of creates obsolescence for the political class, or the criminal class, as I call them. And so why would they want to, I'm talking about the criminal class or the political class, or Schumpeter calls them the incumbency class. Because, it's like this other book I read when I was over there, and that is a book called How Washington Deceives Us, written by Bennett and DeLorenzo, and they were showing something close to what Schumpeter is writing, and that is that we don't have as much turnover in America in terms of political class in Washington as they had in the Soviet Union. I mean, look at how many they have a 96% turnover rate. I mean, a non-turnover rate in the political class in Washington. These people are repeatedly turned back into office like you have a communist system in place in this country.
Well, because the corporations, they spend good money on them, and damn, they're not going to give them up easily. I mean, they bought and paid for them. I mean, they're expensive.
Yeah, they're expensive.
Politicians are expensive.
And it's not the best government that money can buy, because we're not getting good government we're not getting any bang for the buck.
Well, somebody's getting happy with it, because, I mean, they obviously are paying money to keep those people in office.
Oh, yes. And that's what Trump is pointing out. That's why he's such a danger to them. Because what Trump is doing, John, have you noticed that one of the criticisms they make about Trump is how he's putting money on both sides of the political divide? And they're saying, well, he was giving money to Hillary Clinton, and he was giving money to this group and that group.
Yeah, he's a businessman. He's got to pad the pockets.
Tell me about it.
He's admitted that. Admitted that. He knows how to play the game.
He knows how to play the game, and he was playing the game because if you choose the wrong horse in the political race, you're going to be punished if the party you bag loses. You're going to be punished for that in the marketplace. And so, and this is what Gates didn't understand when he thought you just operate an efficient company, and all you got to do is just be a good capitalist and make sure that you're honest and you're doing the right things, and and you're not, breaking the law, and you stay within the confines of the rules and regulations, as if you can do that, by the way, because the antitrust laws are written in such contradictory fashion that you really can't follow the laws, antitrust laws, because one page you're on says this, and the next page it contradicts that and tells you if you do that, and this page says if you don't do this, then that's a violation. So you got the language that cannot be followed. It's just a matter of them coming at you if you don't understand how the game is played. And so, I'm quoting the book written by another book by De Lorenzo called "How Capitalism Saved America." And in there, he talks in the latter part of the book about how Gates didn't understand this. Gates thought you just run a fishing company, everything will be fine, play by the rules, don't be in violation of any of the rules of engagement, make sure that you're following all the regulations that's in place, as if that can be done. And he wasn't kind of, greasing in the palms and so on and so forth. They understand that's how the game is played in Washington. And they came at him, talked about he was violating the antitrust laws and breaking up the company and telling him he's in violation, until he understood what they were saying to him. Hey, you got to put some money over here and put some money over there. And then, of course, the company was fine.
And here's the irony. Gates was a lifelong Democrat, so it had been his dad. And there was the Clinton Justice Department going after him with tooth and nail.
That's right.
And, I defended him during that time, and people saying, he's a billionaire, you're stupid, he don't give a rat's, whatever about you. And I went, the thing is, if he has to fight so vehemently to keep what he made, and he has to put that much expenditure in, like, a time and cost of, legal representation, and then he's still fighting this battle, just realize they can just how much more easily they can override everybody else.
They better understand it, that this idea that Washington is being corrupted by the lobbyists, as I say, we have these virtuous political souls in place, and all they want to do is do the right thing by the country. And they're being corrupted by the lobbyists that's bringing money to them, and what's happening is that they're being corrupted by the money. And the real facts, when you look at it through the lens of those who studied this, I'm talking not only about De Lorenzo and some of those persons writing in books such as How Capitalism Saved America, and you look at it through the lens of Peter Schweiker. In his book, he's writing books on fraud and things like that. They don't like him because he's showing that Washington is the problem. The lobbyists understand how the process works, how it operates. And if you don't go there with a fistful of dollars, then your company's going to have some problems. And what Donald Trump is saying, and he knows it from the inside, he's a threat to these people because he's been an insider and been able to play in the game. But he would have been derelict as a representative that owes his best effort to his stockholders. He'd been derelict to not be involved in the economic and political game that's being played and not play it within the rules of engagement. He'd been derelict in his responsibilities to his stockholders.
You know what, though? He's got more class than a lot of people are going to give him credit for, because if I were him, and he's got amounts of who he paid or who he give money towards, if I were him, I'd say, if you don't stop getting so high and mighty on me, I'll release how much I gave you, how much are backdoor deals. I'm sure they got recordings of it. That would make them urinate down their pant legs, if he'd actually do something like that.
John, Donald Trump poses a clear and present danger to the political class in this country and to the business class and how it operates in this country. We have a plutocracy in this country. We don't have any representatives representing the American people in this country. We have the incumbent class and the political class in this country. We don't have a Republican form of government. We have a plutocratic form of government in the United States, and and both groups are vying for which one would have the numbers. They'll be numerically in control of how the apparatus operates. I'll tell you something. I was really surprised, quite frankly, and I've said this before on other programs. I was really surprised in the naivete of Ann Coulter. I thought, and I still think she's a very astute, out-of-the-box thinker. But I was quite frankly surprised by her positions in the 2004 14 election, the midterm elections, where she thought that if you get a Republican majority in the Senate, they already had a majority in the House under John Boehner. He needs to go, like last week. But if you get a majority in the Senate, that Mitch McConnell will act unlike Harry Reid. And now we're seeing that Harry Reid is no different than Mitch McConnell, and Mitch McConnell is Harry Reid, just in a different party. He doesn't operate any differently, and that's what some of the persons are saying. That's what Ted Cruz was saying. That he was criticized for having said it, but you have to give him credit for having pointed out that nothing has changed in the Senate. And I was surprised at those who are usually very erudite and very astute, out-of-the-box thinkers, who thought that it would be different. I've been surprised by some of the things that Thomas Sowell has written about Donald Trump. I was able to read some of the things that were was being written by on some of the posts I get through going through the Drudge Report. I couldn't get on my internet because it didn't recognize why I would be writing on my network from Europe, and so it blocked me. So something was going on very strange, and it couldn't recognize why I was writing from that place on these computers over there. So it wouldn't let me. It blocked me from going into my my internet connection. But I was able to get on Facebook, and I was able to go through the Drudge Report to read some of the articles. I read Thomas Sowell's article for one, and I was very surprised that he took the position that Donald Trump is untried, untested, but we have people like Kasich, the governor, who has a track record. A track record in what, though? A track record in politics. Politics is our problem. And they have a track record and being within the purview of the status quo, and they want to talk about how they balance the budget, and they did this on the state level. They came in, they had this kind of budget deficit, and they were able to bring about a surplus on the state level. You can forget that stuff. You can't balance the budget in the United States. I mean, you cannot, this idea that you can pay off the national debt the way this thing is structured, that's nonsense. You cannot pay off the national debt. And that model of what you can do within the state level is different from the national model. Because I hate to tell you this, because it's not generally discussed, and I guess you're not supposed to discuss it, but we can be honest here, and that is that the national debt is a flip side of the currency in this country. That is, say, your currency is your debt. And anybody that doesn't understand that, and I don't think that, I haven't seen any evidence that Sowell gets that, although he's, let's be honest, he's one of the bright persons out there. But I don't know if that's recognized. Does he get that? That you can't to destroy the national debt, to reduce it, is to reduce the money supply in the country. Because what is the national debt? The national debt, I know they hide it by saying, well, we owe this much money to China. Yeah, $1.3 trillion to China, but the national debt stands at $18 trillion. So can I ask you the question of where the rest of that money, let's get past China and Japan, and let's go to the rest of the debt. And where's that owed to? It's inside the country. And where's it located? In the currency. Because every time you print dollars into existence, and you're not printing dollars so much in existence anymore, you're doing it through digitizing the digitalization of the currency. We're just adding, numbers in bookkeeping. That when you add those numbers into the currency stream, what you're doing is you're beginning to increase the debt by bringing more money into circulation that has debt attached to it. So that all the dollars, quote unquote, that you have in existence have an additional cost added to it. Because the dollars are created into existence out of debt, because it's created out of thin air. Not backed up by anything since 1971. And so the idea you can pay it off is nonsense. You can't. It absolutely cannot be done. So anybody telling you they're going to pay off the national debt, they're going to reduce the national debt, like how are you going to do that? Because to do that, you destroy the currency at the same time. It absolutely cannot be done. And I want any economist to say otherwise. Come and tell me how you would do that. So the Kasich model in Ohio doesn't work on a national model because the circumstances are totally different. You got to understand that. And therefore, this idea you're going to put another politician on the national level and then it's going to all be good, that's not going to happen. What we really need to do is get out of the box with these politicians and bring in somebody that understands business. And whatever you think about Donald Trump, with all the baggage he brings to the table, and a lot of it he speaks off the cuff, didn't have a teleprompter, so sometimes he's prone to put his foot in his mouth. But not the way you're saying it. When I was outside the country, I saw this fabricated, insulting story that was made up out of whole cloth about him having talked about blood in, he said Megyn Kelly has blood in her eyes, which she does, because everything that she was doing toward Donald Trump was trying to, and Fox is very good at this, because they're not going to buck the Republican Party, because they know what side of the bread that is buttered on for them, so they're going to be pretty much holding on to the Republican Party itself, and Trump is an interloper, and they're doing as much to pour water on this parade as anyone else is doing.
I don't understand how saying somebody's got blood in their eyes, that's an old expression for meaning somebody's intent on killing you or going after you. That's what it means.
Yeah.
And how is that considered sexist? I don't understand that at all.
I saw it over there, John, where they were saying, where he said, and blood in whatever. And the whatever was, look, you got to keep in mind, Donald Trump doesn't use a teleprompter when he talks. And he's prone to cut conversations off in midstream. And what he was saying there was, get off that and go on to something more substantive. But then they're going to say that he was pointing to the feminine aspects of the person on the on that body doing the question, Megyn Kelly, and he's talking into the feminine aspect. If you know what I mean, I'm not going to be using the words in this public forum, but you know what I'm talking about. And they're going to try to act like that's what he was saying. Donald Trump was not saying that. But because of this narrative that, Republicans are supposed to hate women and they hate blacks, the Democrats love them, love both of them. and so therefore he's talking into her private life, and that's what he meant. Without ever saying that, not even thinking about that. And when they went off on that tangent, you saw it over there in Europe, and you over there having these conversations. They're saying the same thing, and they don't, because they're taking our cues and running with those stories and that. And you have all these conversations over there about what the intent was. The intent was very clear, that he was saying that look, I'm off on a tangent and whatever, and got off. He wanted to get back to what he should have been talking about, which is this political campaign. Blood in her eyes, and there are other body parts, 7 body parts in your head alone. But they left the head, and as if you couldn't be in the blood in anybody's ears, no blood in your mouth, no blood in your nostrils, and so all of a sudden something else, and that's what they ran with. And I'm over here and having these conversations about that and some other things. I'll tell you the other part of the conversation I was having over there with a lot of folks was this Michael Brown thing. All this was breaking when I'm over there. I had to go to all these conversations with these people that are being fooled by the airhead media, which I just got through writing about before coming to the studio today. You have to read my article about that, because I wanted to share some things about this trip, and I just had to get into some of the conversations I had with different people over there, who, by the way, they're much more informed over there than they are over here. You could talk to people over there, and they are much more. I'm talking about the person on the street now, the general person on the street, who are much more informed and can talk about. I don't say that they all were what I would call rocket scientists on it, but they had a studied view on the politics of the United States And they do see us in decline. I see it also as a point of decline. And they don't think that we really are a serious country over there, from what I can see. Now I'm just talking about from 2 weeks of observation. But they had this thing about Donald Trump, and then the other big issue over there was Michael Brown. It just so happened while I was over there, they had the 1 year anniversary of Michael Brown, and to hear them tell it over there, black people who are caught breathing on the street have a chance of being clubbed by the police in this country. And so now that's a conversation over there. And I had a lot of jaw dropping that occurred because I wasn't buying that nonsense, and I wanted them to know I wasn't buying that nonsense, because that is not what's happening over here. You can run that by some of the people that want to get under the victimization rock. I'm not one of them. And when you have to use a thug, that's what Michael Brown was a hoodlum. Anytime you are celebrating the 1 year anniversary of this thug, as if he was something other than that, making him the equivalent, political equivalent in Ferguson of the nationalist icon Malcolm X, and trying to act like this guy was some kind of martyr for a cause when he's nothing but y'all saw the video of this guy in that store who did have his hand up one time, and he raised his hand in order to grab this guy around his throat and push him out of the way. That's the only time he raised his hand. So all this stuff about hands up, don't shoot, and they have this mockery talking about Black Lives Matter, and I saw it over there too, where they had this thing about Black Lives Matter, and they had this marshmallow named Martin O'Malley, who said at the Netroot, because I was staying in touch with what was going on back home, wanted to know what was happening, and he had, when they said, take a stand on Black Lives Matter, and he said, to be more comprehensive, Black Lives Matter, White Lives Matter, and all lives matter. And they got booed down for it. And then the next day, maybe a couple of days later, came back and apologized for, quote unquote, his insensitivity. So I wrote him off as a non, entity in politics. Because we can't use these wimps that apologize for saying that all lives matter. How do you apologize for saying something like that? And they carry out the woodwork, by the way, by criticizing him for saying all lives matter. Because then what happened was, I don't know if you picked this up or not, but what happened was that they came from underneath the mask and showed the aggression behind the slogan that Black Lives Matter. Because they were saying in that statement, which they came out of that, by the way, with the Michael Brown situation. And they need the answer, because now it's out in the open. I don't know if you see it as being out in the open, but it is out in the open. And that is, why is it that slogan was created in the Michael Brown situation? And why would they say Black Lives Matter if in that situation it was called for, if in fact Darren Wilson's life mattered? Because why would Michael Brown's life matter more in that situation than Darren Wilson's life mattered when he was a police officer enforcing the law and Michael Brown was in violation of the law? As has happened in every one of these situations where there was someone who got killed. I know you're going to tell me about the one in the northern part of Charleston, South Carolina. You're going to tell me about the person that was on the videotape. And I'm going to say alleged, but if it comes out that this was an actual event, that shooting is very suspicious on that tape. I haven't seen a person shot like that, and then the person keep going, and then bam, 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 and he falls down, and then he falls over on his knees, and all that. I don't even see any blood. But okay, let's take the video and say that it's authentic. I got a lot of questions about that video, but let's say that happened. Even in that case there, it wasn't when the officer ran up to the guy and just started blasting away. And what I get out of that tape, if that tape is authentic, I'll tell you what I get out of that tape. That if you, in fact, flee from the police on the street, the chances are more likely that you're going to get shot. That's what I get out of it. I'm not saying it's right, I'm telling you it's real. So this idea that you have that going on and you having to go through this and looking at it through the lens of how it plays out in Europe, I was in a explanation mode the whole time I was there. And I had some very interesting discussion with people. In this Macedonian case, after she got tired of me not giving Marshal Tito any credit for anything other than the fact that he wanted, as a communist, to run things himself inside of Yugoslavia, but I don't give him any credit for that other than the fact that he wanted to take the tyranny out of the hands of Joseph Stalin and put it in his own hands. And that's why I saw him. I saw him as a thug, and I see Bernie Sanders as a thug. And so I had to say that. Well, she got tired of it. But the 19-year-old daughter was very brilliant. I have to say that conversation went on for another hour. Because we were just having an animated conversation, and so it was really all with all the problems I had in terms of travel. It was all good basically because of the dialogue that I was able to engage in over there in Europe. I go back in a heartbeat again. I'll probably be in London next year, and I'm looking forward to some conversation in the future along that line. But I can tell you right now that Europe has some issues to deal with, and one of the major ones is in the road we're going down right now that's not going to end well is a socialist road path we're going down right now. Europe has already gone down that road, and there are some real problems ahead for Europe. Okay, I got to get out of here, but I will say that it was a very eventful trip. And I'll be enlarging on that in some of my articles, the first of which is on Facebook today, and I'll be writing about this probably for the next 4 or 5 days this week. Until that time, I want you to follow your dream as I come back into the country, ready to get more back into the programs here at allpointstv.com. Don't forget to watch all the programs here. Until that time, I want you to follow your dream, because if you don't follow your dream, you'll never know what's on the other side of the rainbow.